Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're heading to a place that sits incredibly close to a major global power, yet feels, well, like a world apart. Distinct, complex, and often misunderstood. We're diving into Papua New Guinea. Picture this. It's right above Australia, covering the eastern half of that massive island of New Guinea, plus a whole scattering of islands. And here's where it gets immediately fascinating. The absolute defining characteristic revealed in the material we've looked at. PNG is one of the most culturally and linguistically diverse nations on the entire planet. It's quite something. Our mission today is to take this stack of sources you've shared, this rich history and overview, and really extract the key insights, the surprising facts, the human stories. We want to help you understand this extraordinary place, from its ancient origins right through to the challenges and the potential it faces right now. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the land itself.
Yeah, the geography of PNG, according to our sources, is just incredibly rugged and varied.
Think vast, tough mountain ranges, really deep valleys, high plateaus, and then these huge swamps down by the coast like the Fly River Delta. And much of the mountainous interior was only explored by outsiders remarkably recently. Places like Mount Hagen, for instance. Europeans didn't actually reach there until the 1930s.
That's right, 1933, I believe. Astonishingly late, really.
And this challenging terrain, it's absolutely central to the story of his people, isn't it? Yeah. Humans settled here at least 50,000 years ago, migrating probably from Asia, so they're among the oldest populations on Earth. And they moved into these diverse environments, particularly the mountains, perhaps seeking security or resources.
Exactly, and that difficulty of the geography, those natural barriers, they created isolation on a massive scale.
Right.
And that isolation is the key, to the stunning cultural and linguistic diversity you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, the material highlights, over 700 distinct languages spoken across PNG?
Over 700, yes. It's possibly a sixth of all the languages in the world. Just think about that.
Incredible.
While there are hundreds of local languages, Tiktok Pisin eventually emerged as sort of a common language, a lingua franca, and English is the official major language.
In traditional life, before extensive outside contact, was deeply tied to the land subsistence agriculture, cultivating things like sweet potatoes, yams, taro. People built their own villages, made their own tools, and despite all those language differences, they often shared fundamental beliefs. The sources mention really rich oral traditions, fascinating stories about their origins, the first humans, that sort of thing.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how those geographical barriers did more than just separate groups. They actively fostered and preserved this astonishing mosaic of distinct cultures and languages. It created these pockets where unique ways of life, including, complex oral traditions and even some forms of indigenous writing, were maintained for millennia. It also helps explain why traditional social structures, things like clan councils of elders, remained the primary form of local governance and authority for so long in these isolated communities. It just made sense in that context.
That profound isolation eventually started to change, though, with early external contact. The material references Arab voyages reaching the area surprisingly early. We're talking, between 550 and 1200 AD?
That's what the sources suggest, yes. Much earlier than many people might think.
And European exploration arrived much later. We see the first European sightings in the 16th century, Jorge de Menezes, around 1526, Inigo Ortiz de Retz in 1545. But for centuries, these islands were largely ignored by Europeans really until the late 18th century.
Pretty much off the map for them.
Then, interest exploded, driven by the potential for natural resources, gold, minerals, that kind of thing. This led to what the sources call the scramble in the 19th century, where various colonial powers just carved up the island.
Yeah, a real carve-up.
The British, Germans, and Dutch were the main players, though there were earlier Spanish claims too. The British claimed the southeastern part in 1884, and Port Moresby quickly grew into a key center.
A commercial hub.
Right. And the Germans took control of northern areas, calling their territory Kaiser Wilhelm Land. So the indigenous reaction to this sudden forceful intrusion, it was shock, followed by fierce resistance. They tried to drive the invaders out.
Understandably.
The sources describe this period as a radical upheaval. Railways and roads being built through ancestral lands, rivers getting renamed after foreigners, villages sometimes moved from sacred places. It was profound disruption.
And it was a clash of worlds that was almost completely incomprehensible to the indigenous peoples. The sources really highlight a perception of the Europeans not just as different, but perhaps as having supernatural power, or
Right.
maybe even being non-human. The term white masks comes up.
Wow.
This profound disruption, this turning upside down of their reality, it led to continued resistance, sometimes violent, against the Europeans well into the 19th century. Now, from the colonial perspective, of course, this resistance was simply labeled as savage behavior. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, this foundational lack of understanding on both sides, the imposing of alien systems and names, it absolutely laid deep-seated tensions. These tensions would play out in complex ways throughout PNG's later history, including its path to nationhood. You can see the seeds being sown there.
And global conflicts in the 20th century brought further dramatic change. Briefly, World War I saw German New Guinea taken over by Australia.
A shift in colonial administration, basically.
But World War II was a far more significant event on the ground. Japanese occupation began in early 1942. The sources note this aggravated existing tensions and led to brutal Japanese actions, like retaliatory burning of villages.
Terrible times.
And PNG's location was critically important for both sides for Japanese expansion, putting Australia at risk and as a base for Allied counteroffensives. Major battles were fought here, including naval clashes like the Battle of the Coral Sea and just extremely difficult jungle warfare like the battles at Milne Bay and Bunagona.
Brutal fighting in incredibly tough conditions.
After the war, following Allied liberation, primarily by Australian forces, control was formally given to Australia by the U.S. This led to the establishment of a UN trusteeship, effectively combining the former British and German territories under Australian administration.
And that wartime experience, with its violence, the disruption, the widespread presence of external forces, along with the subsequent shift to the UN trusteeship administered by Australia, it profoundly changed the social fabric. And it changed the relationship between the people and external powers. This period was absolutely crucial in setting the stage for future political development and the eventual movement towards independence, a real turning point.
So the path to independence really accelerated in the early 1960s. Australia launched a national development program explicitly aimed at preparing PNG for self-governance. This included expanding education, establishing a university, and increasing the number of Papua New Guineans in the civil service.
Though the sources do note that the pace of this development was heavily dependent on financial support, which Australia provided. There was a dependency there.
Right, okay. Limited self-government was granted in the early 1960s, followed by broader self-governance in 1964, and the formal date for independence was set, September 16th, 1975.
A historic date.
But the sources describe the mood as perhaps less euphoric than in some other newly independent nations. The change was seen by some as more one of degree than of kind or style, and the new government apparently adopted a cautious approach.
Maybe realistic, given the challenges ahead.
Perhaps. So the new independent state was established as a parliamentary democracy. And there's an interesting detail here. The British monarch remains the ceremonial head of state, represented by a governor-general.
Like in Australia or Canada.
Exactly. But what's unusual for a Commonwealth realm, as noted in the material, is that the governor-general is selected by the legislature, the parliament, rather than the executive branch.
Oh, that is interesting. Different process.
Yeah. The unicameral national parliament has 111 seats, including provincial governors. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Looking at those first years after independence, the sources highlight significant political instability right away. There were frequent votes of no confidence in the government 4 times in just the first 14 months.
Wow, that's a lot of turbulence.
It is. The material describes a struggle to transition from what it calls defensive coalition politics. Essentially, groups banding together just to prevent rivals from gaining power towards a more stable party system.
Building stable political foundations is hard.
Definitely. And there were also challenges with the constitutional setup itself. While authority shifted from foreigners to citizens, some provincial leaders apparently saw the new central system as undermining their local autonomy.
A classic tension between central and regional power.
And ethnic leaders, according to the sources, resented what they felt was another imposition of an alien system. Now, these are presented in the sources as significant points of tension and differing viewpoints the young nation faced.
Understandable friction, really.
Later sections in the material also point to these colonial-era dynamics, contributing to ongoing patterns of political instability and corruption. Well, it's noted as a persistent issue across all levels of government, incompetence, nepotism, financial corruption. While widespread, the sources make a specific point that this hasn't seriously jeopardized the performance of government, but is often met with a conspiracy of apologetic silence. Again, we're just reporting these points as they are presented in the sources.
Which raises a really important question, doesn't it? How does a nation founded upon such incredibly diverse, highly localized traditional structures, where authority historically rested with, clan councils, how does it navigate operating effectively under a centrally imposed parliamentary democratic system, especially when that system is grappling with these ingrained challenges like corruption and regional tensions that clearly have roots in its colonial history? It's a fundamental challenge, this attempt to integrate very different governance systems.
Absolutely. Let's pivot now to one of PNG's defining features: its incredible natural resource wealth. Our sources detail a real treasure trove: gold, copper, timber, fish, petroleum, that's oil and gas, plus nickel and iron ore. A huge amount of potential wealth. There have been massive discoveries and projects like the Okateti, Porgera, and Panguna mines, and there's exploration of promising areas like the Laigafu oil field, though developing it requires huge investment, potentially $1 billion, including a pipeline, the sources say.
Big money, big projects.
And the sources show how PNG's economy is heavily tied to global commodity prices, experiencing slumps, like in the mid-'80s, but also booms, like a coffee recovery and the current mineral boom. While exports in the late 80s were around $1 billion kina a year, the potential oil revenues represent a completely different scale.
Game-changing potential, if managed well.
Yet here's the paradox highlighted in the material. Despite this immense resource potential, PNG has faced significant economic instability, budget deficits, and remarkably, the sources mention a lack of assured domestic water supply in some areas. Basic needs aren't always met.
That's the real disconnect, isn't it? The resource curse, some might call it.
Managing this wealth and attracting investment has clearly been difficult. The sources talk about an ugly backlash from local people concerning foreign development of resources found on their traditional lands.
Huge issue with land rights and benefit sharing.
And there's a tension between the state wanting revenue and its role, sometimes noted as a poor steward, which has led to unsustainable logging and environmental damage.
Yeah, the state acting almost against long-term local interests sometimes.
The tourism industry also holds potential stunning biodiversity, vibrant cultures, that whole land of the unexpected idea. But the sources also point to challenges, suggesting a need to move beyond just, selling an image. Maybe deliberately deceitful salesmanship was the phrase used.
Yeah, needing more substance. And what's fascinating here is that stark paradox. A country blessed with such vast natural wealth struggles with basic economic stability and providing essential services like healthcare or even reliable water in some places. It just underscores the immense difficulty in translating resource revenue into genuinely widespread development. And managing external interest companies wanting to extract resources against local communities' expectations, traditional land rights, and critical environmental needs. It's a very tough balancing act.
Let's delve into that complex social landscape, the challenges PNG faces as it navigates modernization and the pressures of a changing world. Healthcare, for instance. The sources describe a mixed public and private system, but one that seems fragmented.
Yeah, not always working together smoothly.
This leads people to bypass local clinics, overloading hospitals. Staffing is low, and essential services are legally supposed to be free, but often people end up being charged fees at facilities.
So access is a real problem, financially and practically.
And geographic diversity makes access incredibly difficult, especially in rural areas, which are noted as particularly neglected. Overall health status is described as poor, even termed a national health emergency, with issues in access, coverage, quality, and just for information systems.
A really challenging picture on the health front.
And education faces significant challenges too. The material frames it as trying to implement Western education in a third world country. Access isn't universal at the primary level. Hundreds of thousands of children aren't in school, needing double the infrastructure and teachers.
The scale of the need is huge.
Using TikTok Paisan as the main language of instruction can apparently disadvantage children from other language backgrounds. And the school system is described as being in crisis, dealing with rapid social change, rising numbers, poverty.
Leading to unrest?
Yeah, unrest in upper schools, and a sense of cultural alienation from the Western curriculum. The sources note differing views from parents. Some prioritize literacy. Others worry that Western education makes children disrespectful to elders, preferring more traditional ways of learning.
That tension between tradition and modernity again.
Exactly. And then there's law and order, called a serious problem, often linked to high urban unemployment. Alcoholism and drug abuse are noted as widespread marijuana in the highlands. mentions of heroin, and even cough mixture abuse.
Social breakdown issues.
The sources describe increasing violence across the country, citing examples from the late 80s. This violence is linked to a decline in traditional social control systems, like the clan councils, and the impact of anonymous urban environments creating a kind of moral vacuum.
When traditional structures weaken and aren't replaced effectively.
Right. The violence is complex, described as imitative, regulatory, even ritualized, and difficult to fully analyze because, as the source puts it, PNG is a mill-free society, a layered, complex place, and information is often lacking. The material also mentions other forms of violence: headhunting, warfare, and sex murder. Again, we're relaying these difficult details as they are presented in the source material, reporting impartially.
And these social issues are all deeply intertwined, aren't they? As traditional systems that provided social control and identity erode under the pressures of rapid urbanization and economic hardship like unemployment, they create profound social instability. The modern state, itself dealing with capacity issues and political instability, struggles to fill that void or effectively address these complex problems. Which brings up another important question. How can traditional systems, which were often effective at managing community life and conflict in the past, potentially coexist with or be integrated into modern governance and social services? Can they provide effective structures and support for the diverse populations today? It's a huge challenge.
Moving to the environment, the sources emphasize the critical importance of PNG's forests for livelihoods, but also point to unsustainable management by the state, describing it as poor stewards who have allowed asset stripping through logging.
A familiar story in resource-rich countries, unfortunately.
Globally, though, PNG is incredibly significant for biodiversity. It's estimated to contain maybe 5 to 10% of the world's species, with a high percentage unique to the island of New Guinea. The sources give figures like 8% of birds, 10% of mammals, over 8% of reptiles, and 6% of fish found nowhere else. Just amazing numbers.
Truly a global hotspot.
Efforts are being made in conservation, national and international conservation areas, indigenous conservation areas, UNESCO sites like the Mount Hagen Cultural Landscape and the Kuok Archaeological Site, Ramsar wetlands, marine parks. So there is activity.
It was good to see.
But critically, despite things like recent outlawing of large-scale logging, the sources detail significant ongoing threats to this biodiversity. Enforcement seems limited against problems like poaching, overfishing, agricultural expansion, especially oil palm plantations, landslides, and pollution from mining and oil spills.
The pressures are immense.
And climate change is also highlighted as a major and growing threat to PNG's unique biocultural heritage, impacting ecosystems, agriculture, health, and the welfare of communities across the Pacific.
Right. And what's fascinating and worrying, here are the high stakes. We're looking at one of the planet's last greatest strongholds of both unique biodiversity and diverse human cultures, facing immediate, significant threats. These threats come not just from internal governance and economic pressures, but also from the external force of global climate change. It powerfully underscores the global importance of conservation efforts in PNG and the vulnerability of these extraordinary ecosystems and the communities whose lives are so interwoven with them.
So where does PNG stand on the world stage? A quick recap. It moved from being divided by colonial powers to becoming an independent nation in 1975. Its place in international relations is shaped by its strategic location and, of course, its history.
Location is key in that region.
The relationship with Australia remains hugely significant economically, politically, diplomatically. Australia, as the larger, wealthier neighbor with those deep historical ties, maintains a strong presence and influence.
The dominant external relationship, really.
PNG has also actively engaged in regional partnerships across the South Pacific. It's involved in groups like the Melanesian Spearhead Group and the South Pacific Forum. The sources mention its own aid initiatives, providing grants to neighbors like the Solomon Islands and Timor-Leste, demonstrating a willingness to play a regional role. It has also sought close ties with Fiji.
Stepping up as a regional player.
Globally, PNG participates in a vast number of international organizations. We're talking the UN, the Commonwealth, major financial institutions, specialized agencies covering labor, culture, telecommunications, postal services, even academic networks. The sources note it has treaties allowing other powers, including Australia, to maintain bases. It seeks cooperation widely.
Pretty well connected internationally.
PNG's foreign policy approach, often linked to its first prime minister, Sir Michael Somare, has been described as the Pacific Way philosophy. This aims for a non-aligned stance, sort of balancing the interests of major global powers like China, Japan, France, and the USA, while maintaining strong existing ties, particularly with Australia and the U.S.
A balancing act.
And the sources also mention a treaty of friendship and cooperation with Indonesia from 2001, reinforcing mutual respect for territorial integrity and non-interference.
Important, given they share a land border. So PNG's stance on the world stage really reflects the position of a relatively young, resource-rich nation navigating these complex relationships. It's balancing historical dependencies and new global interests while simultaneously trying to assert its leadership in the region and manage its significant internal challenges, which often require external cooperation and aid. It's juggling a lot.
Looking ahead then, what are the future prospects for PNG? The sources summarize it as a developing nation with huge potential because of its resources, but still facing significant challenges in rebuilding and developing, particularly after the disruption of things like World War II.
The potential is undeniable.
The economic potential is definitely their possibilities for more resource discoveries. The promise of developing that Legafu oil field, which could dramatically increase export revenues compared to current figures.
Could be transformative financially.
But the sources connect this potential economic growth to the goals of social development. Despite economic growth and its status changing to a lower middle-income country, inequalities and poverty persist. The major challenge noted is effectively using the growing state financial resources and budget to actually address these deep-seated social problems, getting the money to make a difference on the ground.
The perennial challenge of governance and implementation.
Crucially, the sources emphasize the need for real local planning that genuinely involves citizens, considers local issues and preferences, and moves away from a top-down approach often driven by central government elites. Local leaders are highlighted as playing a key role in mediating this process.
Empowering local communities seems vital.
So what does this all mean? We've taken a deep dive into Papua New Guinea's incredible story shaped by its rugged land, preserving unparalleled diversity for millennia, then experiencing the disruptive arrival of colonial powers, the brutal impact of global wars, a cautious path to independence, the opportunities and immense challenges brought by resource wealth, the complex, interconnected social issues it faces today, and its evolving place in regional and global affairs. It's quite a journey.
It really is. Which leads to a final thought, perhaps, for you to consider. Given its extraordinary cultural and linguistic fragmentation, the immense challenge posed by its geography, which both shaped and separated its people, and its volatile history marked by external forces and persistent internal challenges like corruption and integrating traditional and modern systems. What are the most critical factors you think will determine whether Papua New Guinea can successfully translate its potential wealth and rich heritage into widespread well-being and stable, effective governance for all its distinct peoples in the years to come?
A powerful question to consider indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating, complex world of Papua New Guinea. Understanding places like this, with their unique histories and multifaceted challenges, really highlights the value of digging into the layers and exploring the material deeply. Until next time.